Military chaplains serve in the British Army, the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy. They're deployed to some of the toughest parts of the world and minister to servicemen and women and of course their families. Whether they're on active duty or posted back at home, in times of war and in times of peace, chaplains provide the very best operational, spiritual and pastoral support. Lieutenant General Patrick Sanders is a high-ranking officer in the British Army, serving as commander of the Field Army. He sees the true value of military chaplains, particularly in times of peril.
I draw very heavily on my own experience when it comes to military chaplains. Soldiers are not particularly godly. Often they come from backgrounds where they don't really have much of a grounding in faith. And so in peacetime, the chaplain is hugely important when it comes to pastoral care, to identifying people who are weak and vulnerable. But their true role really only comes out when you go on operations and you find yourselves in peril. And the old adage about there being no atheists in a shell hole holds very true. And I've been on a number of tours where the soldiers around me have been, I felt the same, have been frightened, have been grieving, have been confronted by uncertainty as well as some fairly horrific sights and experiences. And under those circumstances, they turn to the chaplain and they turn to faith.
Lieutenant General Sanders goes further, describing chaplains as indispensable, and talks about the remarkable contribution made by his own chaplain when on operations in Iraq in 2007.
I was lucky enough to have someone called Father Danny Hernandez as my chaplain, my padre in Basra Palace in 2007 in what was quite a violent tour. We had a lot of death and injury. And Father Danny was the only person in that 1,200-man battle group who I would describe as indispensable. You could have replaced anyone else from me downwards at the drop of a hat, but you could never have replaced Danny. And wherever you went in the palace, when we were under fire all the time, Danny would be sitting there quietly in the blokes' accommodation. He'd be up in the sangers. He'd be taking a table in the cookhouse for the entire duration of the meal. And he was like the Pied Piper. Soldiers just flocked to him. And he soaked up all of their fear, their uncertainty, their grief, everything that is dark about war. Danny soaked up for them and shouldered their burden. And he was an extraordinary man and had an extraordinary effect on the battle group. So chaplains in war are indispensable. And if you're lucky enough to have someone like Danny, then you're doing very well.
So how does the man himself, Father Danny Hernandez, view military chaplaincy? Father Hernandez has served for more than 18 years.
One of the aspects which I find very important is, as a chaplain, you're actually working and living alongside your men, and you're actually sleeping rough, out in the cold, like in a normal parish where you have a normal setting, and it can be comfortable. You're really taking beyond your comfort zones, and you're out there with them, and in the rough and the smooth. And I think that is one of the tremendous things about chaplaincy, that you're actually working with the people that we sometimes call peripheries, but they're not really peripheries because we're all the church. But it's an aspect I've always found which has strengthened my character, taking me out of my own comfort zones, as difficult as it is at times, but you also know what they're going through and actually suffering.
Present! Rest! Arms! Present!
Father Nick Gosnell is the administrator of the Catholic Military Cathedral in Aldershot. He sees military chaplaincy very much as an incarnational ministry, where chaplains bring Christ to those around them. He explains why priests and deacons exploring their vocation should think about this chaplaincy.
It's not about fighting war, it's not about prosecuting war, it's not about carrying weapons, it's not about engaging with the enemy, apart from the enemy within, apart from the concepts that we all struggle with and the ideas of sin and torment and fear. But it is about being where the people that you're sent to be with are, and as a result of which the military is in great need of such incarnational ministry. And those priests and deacons who are considering their future within the church might truly be desirous of considering their future as an incarnational person here in whatever uniform they choose that they might want to wear, having the opportunity of being with men and women of all ages and all ranks who are grateful for the engagement and the love and the compassion that a man of God shows in the most trying of circumstances as well as in the most joyous of circumstances. Yes, we are often the last port of call, but on operations we're very certainly the first port of call.
But our military chaplains don't just provide spiritual support to believers, they provide a welcome listening ear to whoever needs it. New recruits, for instance, get to meet the padre almost immediately. RAF chaplain Father James Mealy talks about these initial introductions.
One thing that I do say for those people who do arrive on the arrivals brief as the priest chaplain, we go in and welcome everybody. And I say, I know you're looking forward to the padre coming along because, they think they're going to get the Bible bashing and all that sort of stuff. But that isn't the case. I say that padres, chaplains, we are your best friends that you haven't met before and that we'll do everything that we can to help you. So we look after them in whatever respect that they need, whether it's to do with their chain of command or whether it's to do with their home life. God is mentioned within that, but ultimately they know, because I always tell them, I'm a Catholic priest, whatever you say to me is in complete confidence in the seal of confession, unless we need to speak about it if it's hurting you or if it potentially will hurt anybody else. Sitting where the people sit, I call it, and let God's happen. We're only an instrument of God's presence, but we are in the person of Christ, in persona Christi. So we are that Christ in a place where Christ wouldn't necessarily be thought about.
Father Philip Smith is a priest of the Archdiocese of Southwark, attached full-time to the British Army, working with the 5th Battalion, the Rifles. No 2 days are the same, of course, but a lot of his time is spent reaching out to the men and women serving in the army.
I often think to myself, what have I done today? What have I achieved? And often it's a conversation. Soldiers will drop in and say, oh, Father, this is going on in my life. And you might be the only person they have to turn to. Because I'm sure, as you know, unfortunately, most of our soldiers come from quite difficult backgrounds. And you might be the only positive figure in their lives. I try to take a great interest. I'm not really a sportsman, but I go and watch all the sports because saying to a soldier, that was an amazing try or an amazing goal, really lifts them, that actually it's a listening ear. It's being able to provide a sort of non-judgmental way for people who are perhaps in quite difficult situations. And I think that for me has been the most important thing about being a military chaplain.
Summed up nicely there by Father Philip Smith, a listening ear for those servicemen and women facing difficult situations. It's clear that military chaplains live out an extraordinary ministry, and our Catholic padres step up to the challenge of bringing the hope and consolation of Jesus Christ to our forces personnel, especially in life and death situations where fears and anxieties take hold.